One more person coming in, but it is 12:35, which means we can now go to our next speaker, who is actually the organizer of the conference, well, one of them, and also my ex-colleague. So now we have Braid, who is going to talk about native OIDC from scratch in the Dart SDK.
Thank you. Well, happy to be on stage again. I'm going to talk about implementing native OIDC in a Matrix client from scratch. What does it mean? From scratch in this case means I neither used the Matrix Rust SDK, nor the Matrix JS SDK, nor any OIDC package for some programming language, but like really everything from scratch. And it was quite fun and interesting, and I just thought, hey, let's share this experience. There might be other people around here who are interested in implementing OIDC, because it's fun. Who am I? My name is the one with the braid. I'm Matrix consultant and software architect. I do Matrix client development in my free time. I'm interested in Matrix OIDC sliding sync. Maybe you heard my talk on last year's Matrix conference on sliding sync in the Matrix Dart SDK, and apart from that, I'm into end-to-end encryption. I just gave a talk on MLS yesterday. Feel free to ask me about Unix, Flutter, and ARM. If you happen to meet me somewhere on the conference and are interested in night trains or night train travel across Europe and the world, I'm the contact person. Yeah, but let's look at OIDC. So, is there anything new I'm going to present? Not really. Matrix 2.0 is there. OIDC is out there. We all use it. I'm just sharing my humble experience in implementing it on my own. And the next obvious question is, why? I mean, there is the Matrix Rust SDK, there is the JS SDK, there are dozens of OIDC and OAuth 2 packages out there, but why implement it from scratch? There's a simple solution. I was super bored in work meetings. So I took some time and took some IDE, and of course it never happened during work time and definitely not during important meetings, but just in case it happened there, just imagine someone being bored in work meetings, in Scrum meetings, wasting lots of time and interested in OIDC, having an IDE in front of them and curiosity in implementing stuff, and this is how I got to implementing Matrix OIDC. Yeah, this is like the introduction I have on the website of the Matrix client. I implemented it. It's just, there's no reason behind. I was just bored. That's why I started writing a Matrix client with OIDC. This is Polycule. Maybe you already heard about it or saw slides about Polycule. It's a Matrix client. It's a geeky and efficient Matrix client. Whether it's usable, no, it's just my personal playground. I'm working on it because I'm bored, but I'm still experimenting with some interesting technology, some interesting approaches in there. So it's just a Matrix playground for me. It's a geeky and terminal-like design. It's keyboard focused, it's focused on accessibility, it runs on Linux, on post-market OS, on Linux mobile devices, on Android and on web, and it aims to be a next-gen Matrix client, and it aims to be the first next-gen Matrix client not building on Elements SDK and the Foundations SDK. It's completely written in Dart, and yeah, it's for me personally the space to do some groundwork on Matrix, to experiment. It's using, there is a branch using sliding sync. Maybe look at last year's talk about sliding sync. It's using Vodosmac. I was experimenting with the widget API in Dart, and yeah, recently it got support for Matrix OIDC, and all this is the plan of let's make the Matrix Dart SDK a Matrix 2.0 SDK, because it's time to have further SDKs building next-gen Matrix. Yeah, Matrix OIDC in my implementation, I was just told it's basically the first Matrix client which does not build on the JS or Rust SDK, which supports OIDC. I was thinking a lot when I had the idea, yeah, let's do something with OIDC, whether I could like use some random Dart packages to get the stuff done, but I quickly realized, yeah, no, they're all shitty. They drop in some storage providers. They have native code I do not want. They are complete overhead, and I wanted it to be like a compatible pure Dart implementation, which means it could run everywhere from a console application up to WebAssembly. So yeah, I decided to build everything on my own. The implementation I did, OIDC in the Matrix Dart SDK, and at that point, really huge thank you to all my friends from Family who maintain the Matrix Dart SDK, who also did lots of review with me, who were always available for questions, even though the review like at the end took lots of time, but it is a huge new implementation, or it's a broad new feature to be shipped. The implementation itself is pretty minimal, considering it's a complete OIDC implementation. It supports like many revisions of the MSCs published in order to have compatibility to like any random Synapse version out there, to any random Matrix authentication service version out there. So considering that, 1K lines of code is pretty decent. It's an absolutely atomic approach. Everything is a drop-in replacement, touching nothing or almost nothing of the original Matrix Dart SDK code, in order to just keep it simple and stupid. There is no native code. That means it's portable. It does not bond you to any particular platforms. It does not restrict you to Android or iOS. It's a pure Dart implementation where the only thing at the end you need to natively do is like figuring out the redirect URL you were given and handle it back to the Dart SDK implementation. And also a difficult task I was facing. There was I had lots of bugs with token refresh, and I wanted to keep it as minimal as possible so that other users of the implementations using the Matrix Dart SDK do not need to change any code and do not need to take care of refresh token handling, etc. That was my idea, and how it looks nowadays, it's a pretty decent implementation. So it implements the umbrella MSC 3861 next generation auth for Matrix based on OIDC. Under this umbrella MSCs, there's a huge bunch of different MSCs. There is a very old MSC included for better spec for Matrix identifiers. I had to agree on some syntax for creating device IDs, etc. And there was just old depth of the spec to be addressed. So starting from this groundwork, afterwards the basic authorization code grant and refresh token grant, the authorization server discovery, which was a huge nightmare because in the past of the MSC 2965 there were like 4 different approaches of actually discovering the Matrix authentication service, and I decided to implement all of them, because why implement a single one if we can just implement all of them, which caused a huge overhead, but ended up with an implementation compatible to everything out there. I implemented the dynamic client registration, which is relevant for any Matrix client which does not run in a closed ecosystem where you have like your home server, your branded client available, for example, for your employees, or some closed white labeling. The other random MSCs which provide like some groundwork, which is actually no code, but just clarification. What's not implemented, by the way, I need a 65 watts USB-C charger right here as soon as possible, thanks, or a power bank. What's not implemented and not intended in this implementation right now is OIDC sign-in and end-to-end encryption bootstrap via QR. Reason is simple. I wanted to have like basic OIDC first, and once that's done, we can talk about everything else. And device management for application service is simply not relevant for me because I'm a Matrix client, and the Matrix Start SDK focuses on many things, but definitely not application services. Also, one unstable MSC implemented the deep linking for account management. I also just, because it's a couple of lines of code, I implemented it, and now time for the actual lessons learned. I announced lessons learned. I have a huge collections of cursed things. Let me begin. Redirect URLs are cursed. Why are they cursed? There's a simple answer to it. URL encoding is cursed. I was spending hours and hours debugging redirect URLs. The Matrix authentication service was rejecting my redirect URLs. I was submitting during the device registration. It was complaining about trailing slashes. It was complaining about existing trailing slashes on mobile. It was complaining about lacking trailing slashes. It was complaining about fragment redirect. It was complaining about how is the other thingy called? Not query redirect. Like, there were many complaints which were very roughly documented on the Matrix side of OIDC. It was lots of reading through OIDC specification itself in order to figure out in which cases, considering that I was implementing something supporting web, desktop, mobile, and like all of that, figuring out how to handle redirect URLs correctly to be valid on all platforms. Yeah, that took lots of time, and I had lots of help from someone I will credit at the end of this talk. A second thing, absolutely cursed, is token rotation during SSSS. When you do the SSSS bootstrap in a Matrix client, you have many API calls. Some take longer, some are very short. And if you rotate the tokens, the OIDC tokens, during requests, still ongoing, dispatch new requests with other tokens, that's a nightmare. Because multi-threading is cursed when we need like a linear sequence. By the way, that reminds me of MLS yesterday. When we need a linear sequence of tokens and inheritance of credentials, it's pretty hard to work with asynchronous requests, dispatching dozens of requests, refreshing tokens, meanwhile having still ongoing requests. That's bloating up everything. I had to rewrite huge parts of the logic of the Matrix Start SDK doing the key backup because it used lots of parallel requests and that they had to be serialized, and or at least not serialized in that way, but we had to take care to inject the correct tokens into every request, even if they were dispatched earlier, and that was very cursed and caused lots of discussions during the review process, because the solution I figured out was basically extending an HTTP client to inject tokens into requests, and Triller, the maintainer who reviewed my pull request, considered that implementation as very cursed. I also consider it as very cursed, but the reason is simply because multi-threading is very cursed and token rotation is very cursed. So cursed solutions for cursed problems. Another lesson learned, I forgot why, but that's okay. Dynamic client registration metadata localization is cursed. A Matrix client registers itself to the authentication service and submits some metadata. For example, the application name, the logo, an URL, contact details for abuse reporting, etc. And many of these fields are localized, and it is very cursed to provide cursed maybe not the correct word, but it is very hard to figure out a way to intuitively provide an API to application developers inside an SDK to intuitively provide dynamic registration metadata in a localized way, and it is even more cursed to make the Matrix authentication service actually accept the localized metadata, because once again it was having many requirements, many interesting constraints one had to figure out during the implementation. Next thing which is cursed, systemd out of memory D is cursed. Consider you start authorization of a Matrix client and it launches your browser, and meanwhile your device is running out of memory and is killing the main process of your app. That's very cursed, because when you have the redirect URL, you need to recover from that. Running out of memory is very cursed when implementing OIDC. I feel like with my coworkers, I also recently had a talk in another project discussing issues with running out of memory and killing apps in background while actually doing the authorization in the web browser. And now the very most cursed thing. Discovery is cursed. The MSC 2965, as of the state when I implemented it and when it got reworked and reworked again, and someone smiling in the audience reworked it again and simplified it again, caused 4 different ways of discovering the IDP in Matrix. We first had the unstable /auth/metadata, or no, that's what we now have. That's what was introduced at the end. We have the discovery via the regular well-known, which contained just information where to find the IDP. That was deprecated. We had the implementation doing the OIDC way of using the .wellknown /OIDC, where we are requesting the well-known from OIDC rather than Matrix for discovering the authorization metadata we need. Also, in between times, there was the /auth_issuers API endpoint, which was also later deprecated, but for compatibility I decided to still implement all 4 of them. So if you use the Matrix Start SDK to request or to try to discover to the IDP of your home server, it will try all methods up to the moment it finds anything. So now I talked a lot about lessons learned and about cursed things in OIDC. I hope you find it a bit amusing. If you're curious of trying it out, you can try out the web version of Polycule on polycule.im/web, or download the Polycule app on the Linux distribution of your choice, your post-market OS of your choice, or the F-Droid of your choice. Also, there is the pull request number 2024 on the Matrix Start SDK containing the implementation. It's sadly still in review process. It took a long while. The initial pull request was submitted, I think, in January or February, and we had lots of work ongoing with Family discussing it, rewriting parts, getting everything linearized, and yeah. So I think we're slowly at a point where it's ready to land, but some minor questions are still left in the pull request. At this point, thanks a lot to Quentin, who was always there. Yeah, he's sitting in the front of the audience, who was always there in the Matrix Auth and Identity room, answering my questions about cursed technology and cursed errors I had with the Matrix authentication service and the and clarifications about the MSCs. That saved me lots of time, and I got a reply at any time of the day or the night whenever I asked something, and that was lots of help. If you're interested in OIDC or generally Matrix, or want to talk to me, I'm a Matrix consultant. I do software architecture on Matrix projects. You can reach me by mail, info@braid.business, or by matrix at braid:/alsace.hair. Yeah, I still want to share one last link with you. RWOIDC.yat.com, that's a website tracking Matrix 2.0's state of OIDC. In the specification, you will see a bold yes when opening the page. And if you're curious about OIDC and Matrix, you can consult this page. Questions?
Is this really full OIDC or only OAuth 2?
It's Matrix OIDC. It's the subset of OIDC we require to be used in Matrix.
And why it's not full OIDC?
Because the Matrix specification says to do Matrix OIDC. This is, I implemented it. I did not write the specification. This talk is about implementing it. I'm not questioning the specification, but there's someone who really loves discussing that question.
I can talk about I can talk about that, having written most of the spec. So we started as working from OIDC and using a lot of things that were in OIDC. And OIDC is a superset of 2. And that's also why you got all those layers of discovery, all those iterations. Because also we figured out at some point that, well, we actually don't need most of the things that OIDC gives us, like mainly the identity layer that OIDC gives you with the ID token and stuff like that. So we tried to trim it down as much as possible. Which is why, even though Braid talked about OIDC, Matrix OIDC all the time in this talk, I tried to rebrand the whole thing as like next gen auth in Matrix, because it was like causing so much confusion with everyone, because people thought that you would just be able to like use your own key cloak and use that natively with your client. But actually, OIDC and Keycloak and software like that are missing a bunch of stuff that we would need for that. So I rebranded the whole project as just Matrix Auth based on OAuth 2, and we took some of the bits from OIDC, but it's mostly based on standard IATF OAuth 2 specs, basically.
Yeah, so it is OAuth. It's more than OAuth 2, but it's not a complete OIDC implementation, because that's nothing we need in our case. And also, like, plain OIDC is not suitable for Matrix. We have requirements in Matrix. For example, we have special endpoints to reset cryptographic key material. That's not foreseen in OIDC. We adopted OAuth and parts of OIDC to our needs and extended them to match Matrix. And that's, after all, once again, what I did in Polycule, what I did for the Matrix Start SDK. Example, cryptographic key material reset, which is also something where we redirect to the authentication service, even though it's not talking OIDC, it's just like some random request where you deep link to a link, and afterwards some API endpoints are available for a couple of minutes, rather than actually using scopes for this. So I feel like it's an ongoing progress to align things. For example, this use case that could be better aligned with the OIDC spirit, but in general, it's a living implementation, it's a living standard, and we're definitely moving away from a pure OAuth 2 thingy, rather to more and more features of OIDC, actually.
Any other questions?
Hello. So I know the PR hasn't merged yet. I was wondering how much time it took to do the actual implementation.
That's a good question. Okay, let's calculate. How many Scrum meetings do I have per week? No. Yeah, that's a very good question. I cannot really tell, because I implemented it 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, an hour there, random thought in the afternoon, quick review. It was no work project, so I did not have a block time working on this. It was just when I was motivated to do it, I did it. So I really cannot answer that question.
Thanks.
I will say, as one of the co-maintainers of the Dart SDK, Braid has been super friendly and collaborative in the enduring review process, and it is super close to getting merged. So hopefully we get merged soon, and then all of the Dart SDK clients, Fluffy Chat, and everything will have OIDC, maybe.
Especially a particular company will definitely profit from this.
And to answer your question on like how long does it take, I mean, of course I'm biased having like knowing the spec and stuff like that, but I had to implement it from scratch in Element Admin like very recently, and that was about maybe a day of implementation of time. But obviously this is like with me knowing what I'm doing. If you're really interested in implementing the next gen of API, on this website there's a hidden link somewhere that gives you a client implementation guide, and that is very interactive, that goes you through the whole flow step by step of like what needs to happen. And that's probably a good starting point to actually implement the spec from scratch. This whole OAuth2 world is confusing. There's a lot of specs, but the actual exchange itself is relatively simple. At least in my opinion. Maybe Braid, you have a different opinion on this, but it's really not as scary as it sounds.
Yeah, I would like to even extend this. Implementing the few endpoints we need is not the complicated question. The interesting question is the software architecture behind. The question is how to structurize an SDK, how to implement these things in an atomic way, how to be compatible, how to keep it minimal, and how to keep it efficient. Those are the questions. Implementing these endpoints is a question of a couple of hours.
And that is the end. That is all the time we have. A huge round of applause for Braid, please.